The metal was cold, not just from the damp French air that clung to everything in the autumn of 1944, but with a deeper, more profound chill. It was the cold of betrayal. The M5 3-inch anti-tank gun was a beast of a weapon, a testament to American industrial might. It was supposed to be their shield, their answer to the German Panzers that had terrorized Europe for 5 long years. But here, in the hedgerow country of Normandy, it was a lie, a heavy, steel-forged lie. Corporal Thomas Bennett felt that lie in the marrow of his bones. He and his crew had hauled this gun across half of France, had cleaned it, oiled it, and whispered their hopes to it in the dead of night. They had trusted it, and now that trust was turning to ash in their mouths. The problem wasn't the gun, not really. The problem was the beast it was meant to kill, the Panther, a new breed of German armor, a predator with a sloped 80mm thick hide that laughed at their 3-inch shells. Their armor-piercing rounds, the best they had, might as well have been paintballs. They'd seen it happen. A direct hit, a flash of sparks, and the round would just bounce. A ricochet that screamed off into the sky, a sound that mocked their efforts and their courage. The manual, their Bible, was a book of false promises. It told them how to aim, how to fire, how to maintain their weapon. It gave them firing tables and penetration data that were already obsolete. It was a manual for a different war, a war against a lesser foe. Against the Panther, it was a death sentence. The book said to wait, to let the enemy close to point-blank range before firing, a suicidal proposition. At that range, the Panther's own 75mm cannon wouldn't just penetrate their gun shield, it would vaporize them. It was an impossible choice, a tactical absurdity that could only have been conceived in a world far from the mud and the blood of the front lines. This was the absurdity of war that gnawed at Bennett. The idea that the only way to follow the rules was to die. The only way to survive was to break them. And in the heart of Normandy, surrounded by the ghosts of fallen comrades and the ever-present threat of an enemy they couldn't scratch, survival was the only rule that mattered. The command had forbidden any deviation from the manual. Any ammunition tricks or unauthorized modifications were grounds for a court-martial. But what was a court-martial compared to a shallow grave in a foreign field? What was a reprimand from a distant officer compared to the roar of a panther bearing down on you, its machine gun spitting death? This is the story of a man who chose to live, a man who, in a moment of desperate inspiration, saw a different way, a way that was not in any book, a way that defied the laws of ballistics as he knew them. This is the story of how one soldier, with one forbidden trick, turned a useless cannon into a legend, and in doing so, changed the very nature of anti-tank warfare. It is a story of how the ingenuity of a single man, born of desperation, can be more powerful than all the steel and all the rules that a war can throw at him. The date was September 19th, 1944. The place was a small, insignificant patch of earth near St. Lo, a town that had already been reduced to rubble in the brutal fighting that followed the D-Day landings. The Bocage, the infamous hedgerow country of Normandy, was a labyrinth of earthen walls and tangled vegetation. It was a landscape that favored the defender, a place where a single machine gun could hold up a company, and a well-hidden anti-tank gun could be a king. But for Bennett and his crew, their kingdom was a trap. They were positioned on a slight rise, a 12-foot advantage over the sunken lane in front of them, a perfect firing position, in theory, but the theory didn't account for the Panther. 5 of them. They emerged from the morning mist like prehistoric beasts, their long cannons sniffing the air. The ground vibrated with the rumble of their Maybach engines, a low, guttural growl that promised annihilation. They were moving slowly, cautiously, but with an unnerving confidence. They knew the limitations of the American anti-tank guns. They knew they were all but invincible from the front. The men in Bennett's gun pit felt a familiar knot of dread tighten in their stomachs. They had seen this movie before, and it always ended badly. Bennett watched them through his binoculars, his knuckles white. He could see the German commanders, silhouetted in their open hatches, scanning the hedgerows with an arrogant calm. They were hunting, and his crew was the prey. He could feel the fear in the air, thick and metallic. The loader, a kid from Ohio who was barely old enough to shave, was fumbling with a shell, his hands trembling. The gunner was staring at the rangefinder, his face a mask of grim concentration. They were all looking to Bennett. He was the corporal, the one who was supposed to have the answers, and he had none. He did the math in his head, the desperate calculus of survival. The manual said to wait until they were within 500 yards. At that range, there was a slim chance, a prayer, that their rounds might find a weak spot, but at 500 yards, his gun, with its muzzle flash and its cloud of cordite smoke, would be a beacon. The Panthers would turn their turrets, and it would be over in a matter of seconds. A single high-explosive shell from one of those 75s would turn their gun pit into a crater. He looked at his men, their young faces etched with a fear that mirrored his own. He couldn't do it. He couldn't lead them into that slaughter. There had to be another way. He looked at the gun, the source of his frustration and his fear, the M5. A good gun, a reliable gun, but it was designed for a different kind of fight. It was a direct fire weapon, meant to shoot in a straight line. Its maximum elevation was 15 degrees, a limitation designed to prevent stress on the carriage and the recoil mechanism. Firing at a higher angle was strictly forbidden. It was a rule that had been drilled into them since basic training. A rule that was supposed to keep them and their equipment safe. But what if the rule was wrong? What if the danger wasn't in breaking the rule, but in following it? An idea began to form in Bennett's mind. A wild, improbable notion. It was a spark of madness, born of the sheer terror of the moment. He had been a farm boy before the war. He knew about trajectories. He knew that what goes up must come down. And he knew that the top of a tank was its weakest point. The Panther's frontal armor was a formidable 80 millimeters thick, sloped back to increase its effective thickness. But its top armor, the deck over the engine and the roof of the turret, was a mere 40 millimeters, and in some places, as little as 25. It was designed to protect against shrapnel and machine gun fire from aircraft, not a direct hit from a 3-inch shell. What if he could turn his direct fire weapon into a mortar? What if he could lob a shell over the top of the hedgerow in a high arc and have it come down on top of one of those steel beasts? It was a crazy idea. The gun wasn't designed for it. The sights weren't calibrated for it. He would be firing blind, guessing at the range and the elevation. The chances of hitting anything were 1,000,000 to 1. And if he missed, he would have given away their position for nothing. He would have signed their death warrant. He looked at the advancing Panthers, now less than 1,000 yards away. He looked at the faces of his men, their eyes pleading for a miracle, and he made a decision. He would not die here, not today. He would not sacrifice his men on the altar of a failed doctrine. He would take the 1,000,000 to 1 shot. He would break the rules. He would give them a miracle, or he would die trying. "Crank it up," he said, his voice barely a whisper. The gunner looked at him, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Crank what up, Corporal?" "The elevation," Bennett said, his voice stronger now, filled with a newfound resolve. "All the way, to the stops." The gunner hesitated, his hand hovering over the elevation wheel. "But Corporal, the manual—" "To hell with the manual," Bennett snapped. "The manual is going to get us killed. Now do it!" The gunner, seeing the fire in Bennett's eyes, obeyed. He began to turn the wheel, and the long barrel of the M5 began to rise. It went past the 15-degree mark, the red line that screamed danger. It kept going, the gears groaning in protest. 20 degrees, 25, 30. It stopped at 32 degrees, the absolute physical limit of the mechanism. The barrel was pointing at the sky, a silent prayer aimed at the heavens. It looked absurd, unnatural. It looked like hope. Now came the hard part, the guessing. Bennett had to estimate the range, the wind, the trajectory. He had to become a human computer, a ballistics expert in the space of a few heartbeats. He looked at the lead Panther, a dark, menacing shape against the green of the French countryside. He made his calculations, a mixture of instinct, memory, and sheer, unadulterated guesswork. He gave the gunner the deflection, the horizontal aiming point. He took a deep breath, the cold air burning his lungs. "Fire," he said. The world exploded in a flash of light and a deafening roar. The gun bucked, the recoil sending a shockwave through the ground. The shell, a 13-pound piece of high-explosive steel, screamed into the sky, a tiny speck on a mission of hope. They all watched it, holding their breath. It seemed to hang in the air for an eternity, a silent, spinning messenger of death. And then it began to fall. It came down almost vertically, a steel thunderbolt from a clear blue sky, and it hit. Not just a hit, a perfect hit. It struck the lead Panther right on the engine deck, the weakest part of its armor. There was a flash of orange, a puff of black smoke, and then a secondary explosion as the tank's own ammunition cooked off. The turret blew off, a 10-ton piece of steel cartwheeling through the air before crashing to the earth with a sickening thud. The Panther, the invincible predator, was a burning wreck. For a moment, there was silence. The men in the gun pit stared, their mouths agape. They couldn't believe what they had just seen. It was impossible. It was a miracle. And then a cheer went up, a raw, primal scream of victory and relief. They had done it. They had killed the beast. But there was no time to celebrate. There were still 4 more Panthers out there, and now they knew where the shot had come from. The remaining tanks began to turn, their cannons traversing, their machine guns chattering. The hunt was on. But now the prey had teeth, and Bennett was just getting started. "Again!" he yelled. his voice hoarse with excitement. The loader, his hands no longer trembling, rammed another shell into the breech. The gunner, a grin splitting his face, made a slight adjustment to the aim. Bennett gave the order. Fire! Another roar, another high-arcing shell, another perfect hit. The second Panther shuddered to a halt, a plume of smoke pouring from its turret. 2 down. The remaining 3, their confidence shattered, began to reverse, to back away from this unseen, impossible weapon. They were no longer hunters. They were the hunted. Bennett's gun roared a 3rd time. The shell hit the 3rd Panther in the turret ring, jamming it. The tank, unable to aim its main gun, was helpless. It too began to retreat, a wounded animal fleeing the field of battle. In the space of 90 seconds, 3 Panther tanks, the pride of the Panzerwaffe, had been knocked out by a single, outgunned American anti-tank crew. It was a feat that should have been impossible, a victory that would not be in any official report. But for the men who were there, for the men whose lives had been saved by the desperate ingenuity of one man, it was a moment that would be seared into their memories forever. It was the day that Corporal Thomas Bennett, a farm boy from America's heartland, taught the German army a new lesson in the brutal arithmetic of war, a lesson written in fire and steel at an angle that was strictly forbidden. If these memories of sacrifice resonate with you, please consider liking this video, leaving a comment with your thoughts, and subscribing to ensure these stories are never forgotten. The news of Bennett's impossible victory spread like wildfire. Not through official channels, of course. An officer who reported that one of his crews had deliberately and flagrantly violated regulations to achieve a victory would be inviting a court-martial for his men and a black mark on his own record. No, this was news that traveled in whispers, from one gun crew to another, in hushed tones in the back of a deuce and a half, or over a shared cigarette in a muddy foxhole. It was a secret, a piece of forbidden knowledge that gave them a fighting chance against an enemy that had seemed unbeatable. Gun crews across the front began to experiment. They would find a quiet spot, a place where they wouldn't be seen by any prying officers, and they would practice. They would crank their guns up to the stops, learning the feel of the weapon at these extreme angles. They would pace off ranges, make their own crude firing tables, and learn the art of high-angle fire. It was a dangerous business. A miscalculation could send a shell into their own lines. A premature detonation could destroy the gun and kill the crew. But it was a risk they were willing to take. It was a risk that was preferable to the certainty of death that came with facing a Panther head-on. The Germans were baffled. Their intelligence reports were filled with accounts of Panthers being knocked out by mysterious, high-angle attacks. They couldn't understand how it was happening. The Americans didn't have any weapons in their inventory that were capable of this kind of indirect fire with such accuracy. They suspected a new, secret weapon, a wonder weapon that was turning the tide of the war in the hedgerows. They never suspected that the weapon was the same old M5, wielded in a way that its creators had never intended. Bennett's innovation was a game-changer. It didn't win the war, of course. The war was won by the combined might of the Allied armies, by the courage of millions of men and women, and by the industrial power of the nations behind them. But in the small, brutal world of the infantryman, in the intimate, terrifying duels between anti-tank guns and panzers, it was a revolution. It gave the American soldier a weapon that could fight back. It gave him hope, and in a war that was often defined by hopelessness, that was a victory in itself. Thomas Bennett was never officially recognized for his contribution. There was no medal, no citation, no mention in the official histories. He was just one of the millions of ordinary men who did extraordinary things in a time of crisis. He went back to being a farm boy after the war, his moment of battlefield genius a private memory, a story to be told to his grandchildren. But his legacy lived on, in the tactics that he had pioneered, and in the lives of the men he had saved. The concept of the top attack weapon, the idea of striking a tank from above, where its armor is weakest, became a cornerstone of modern anti-tank doctrine. The Javelin missile, with its sophisticated guidance system and its ability to climb high into the air before plunging down onto its target, is the direct descendant of Bennett's desperate improvisation. The principle is the same. The technology has changed, but the idea, the spark of genius that was born in a muddy gun pit in Normandy, remains. This is the nature of war. It is a story of grand strategies and massive armies, but it is also a story of individual courage and ingenuity. It is a story of men like Thomas Bennett, who, when faced with an impossible situation, refused to accept defeat. They are the unsung heroes, the men whose names are not in the history books, but whose actions shape the course of history. They are the ones who remind us that the human spirit, in its moments of greatest desperation, is the most powerful weapon of all. Let's go back to that moment, the moment of decision. Imagine the weight of it, the lives of your men in your hands, the rule book screaming one thing, your survival instinct screaming another. It's a choice that no one should have to make. But in war, these are the choices that are made every day. They are the choices that define heroes. Not the heroes of the movies with their chiseled jaws and their patriotic speeches, but the real heroes, the tired, scared, ordinary men who find something extraordinary within themselves when it matters most. Bennett was not a maverick. He was not a rebel. He was a soldier who had been trained to follow orders, but he was also a man who understood the grim reality of his situation. He understood that the orders he had been given were a death sentence, and he had the courage to defy them. That is a special kind of courage. It is the courage to think for yourself, to trust your own judgment, even when it goes against everything you have been taught. It is the courage to take responsibility, not just for your own life, but for the lives of those who depend on you. His crew trusted him. They saw the certainty in his eyes, the conviction in his voice. They were scared, but they were more scared of the Panthers than they were of breaking a rule. And so, they followed him. They turned the wheel. They loaded the shell. They aimed the gun. They became partners in his act of defiance, and together they achieved the impossible. Think about the sound of that first ricochet, the one that told them their weapon was useless, the sound of their own mortality whistling past their ears. It's a sound that would break a lesser man. It's a sound that would make him give up, resign himself to his fate. But for Bennett, it was a wake-up call. It was the moment he realized that the old rules no longer applied. It was the moment he started to think outside the box, or in this case, outside the firing arc. The story of Thomas Bennett is a testament to the American soldier. The GI, the dogface, the grunt. He was not a Superman, he was a citizen soldier, a product of a democracy that values individual initiative and problem solving. He was the kind of man who, when given a problem he couldn't solve, would find a new way to solve it. He would improvise, adapt, and overcome. It's a spirit that has defined the American military for generations. It's a spirit that was alive and well in that gun pit in Normandy. The irony is that the Germans, with their reputation for efficiency and engineering prowess, had created a weapon that was, in a way, too perfect. The Panther was a masterpiece of design, a formidable fighting machine, but its very perfection was its weakness. Its designers had not anticipated that an enemy would be so audacious, so unorthodox, as to turn an anti-tank gun into a piece of artillery. They had not accounted for the human factor. They had not accounted for the desperate genius of a man like Thomas Bennett. And so, the legend was born. The legend of the gun crew that could kill Panthers from a mile away. The legend of the magic shells that fell from the sky. It was a legend that gave a much-needed boost to the morale of the American troops. It was a story that was told and retold, embellished with each telling until it took on the quality of a folk tale. But at its heart, it was a true story, a story of courage, ingenuity, and the will to survive. It's a story that deserves to be remembered, not just as a piece of military history, but as a human story. A story about the power of one person to make a difference. A story about the importance of questioning authority, of thinking for yourself, of finding your own solutions to the problems you face. It's a story that is as relevant today as it was in 1944, because the challenges we face may be different, but the qualities we need to overcome them, courage, ingenuity, and the will to persevere, are the same. So the next time you see a picture of a World War II veteran, an old man with faded eyes and a stooped shoulder, remember this story. Remember that he may have been one of those ordinary men who did extraordinary things. He may have been a Thomas Bennett, a man who, in a moment of crisis, found it within himself to change the world, one forbidden angle at a time. Let's paint a picture of the battlefield. The air is thick with the smell of cordite and damp earth. The trees are stripped bare, their branches clawing at the sky like skeletal fingers. The ground is a churned-up mess of mud and shell craters. And in the middle of it all, a small group of men, huddled around a piece of steel that is their only hope. They are a cross-section of America, a farm boy from Iowa, a factory worker from Detroit, a college student from California. They are all different, but they are united by a common purpose, to survive. And to do that, they have to kill. They are not killers by nature. They are men who were taught to value life, to build things, to create. But war has a way of stripping away the veneer of civilization, of reducing a man to his most primal instincts. And in this moment, the instinct to survive is all that matters. The instinct to protect the men next to you, the men who have become your brothers. The instinct to eliminate the threat that is bearing down on you, the threat that wants to erase you from existence. This is the reality of combat. It is not glorious. It is not heroic in the way the movies portray it. It is a dirty, brutal, terrifying business. But it is also a place where the best of human nature can be found. Courage, sacrifice, loyalty, and ingenuity. The kind of ingenuity that can turn a flawed weapon into a war winner. The kind of ingenuity that can find a way when there is no way. Bennett's story is a reminder that the most important weapon in any war is the human mind. The ability to think, to reason, to innovate. That is what separates us from the beasts. That is what allows us to overcome even the most daunting of challenges. The Germans had the better tank, but the Americans had the better idea. And in the end, that's what made the difference. It's a lesson that we should never forget. In a world that is increasingly dominated by technology, it's easy to lose sight of the human element. It's easy to believe that the side with the most advanced weapons will always win. But history teaches us a different lesson. It teaches us that technology is only a tool. It is the hand that wields the tool, the mind that directs it, that ultimately determines the outcome. So let us honor the memory of Thomas Bennett and the countless other unsung heroes of World War II. Let us honor their courage, their sacrifice, and their ingenuity, and let us strive to be worthy of their legacy. Let us be the kind of people who, when faced with an impossible situation, have the courage to find a new way, the courage to break the rules, the courage to change the world. If these memories of sacrifice resonate with you, please consider liking this video, leaving a comment with your thoughts, and subscribing to ensure these stories are never forgotten. The psychological impact on the German tank crews must have been devastating. They were the masters of the battlefield, the Iron Knights of the Third Reich. Their Panthers and Tigers were the most feared weapons of the war. They were used to a sense of invincibility, a feeling of technological superiority, and then, suddenly, they were vulnerable. They were being killed by an enemy they couldn't see, by a weapon that shouldn't have been able to harm them. It was as if the laws of physics had been suspended. It was as if they were fighting ghosts. Imagine the fear in the cockpit of a Panther, the claustrophobic confines of the steel hull, the smell of oil and sweat, the constant tension, the knowledge that at any moment a shell could come crashing through the armor, turning your world into a fiery hell. And now, a new fear, the fear of an attack from above, a threat that you can't see, that you can't fight back against, a threat that turns your tank, your fortress, into a coffin. This was the other, unseen victory that Bennett and his fellow gunners had won. They had not just destroyed tanks, they had destroyed the confidence of the men who crewed them. They had planted a seed of doubt, of fear, in the minds of their enemy. And in a war of attrition, a war of nerves, that was a victory of immense importance. It was a victory that could not be measured in terms of destroyed equipment or territory gained. But it was a victory that was felt in the hearts and minds of the men on both sides of the conflict. The American GIs, on the other hand, felt a surge of confidence. They had found a chink in the armor of the beast. They had a weapon that could fight back. The balance of power had shifted. The fear was still there, of course. War is always a fearful business, but it was no longer the paralyzing, hopeless fear that they had felt before. It was a fear that was tempered by a newfound sense of empowerment, a feeling that they were not just helpless victims, but active participants in their own destiny. This is the ripple effect of a single act of courage. It is a stone thrown into a pond, its ripples spreading out in all directions, touching everything in their path. Bennett's decision to break the rules had consequences that he could never have imagined. It changed the tactics of a battle, the morale of an army, and the course of a war. It is a powerful reminder that no act is too small, no individual too insignificant to make a difference. The story also highlights the importance of adaptability in warfare. The side that can learn, that can evolve, that can adapt to changing circumstances is the side that will ultimately prevail. The Germans, for all their engineering brilliance, were rigid in their thinking. They had a doctrine, and they stuck to it. The Americans, on the other hand, were more flexible, more pragmatic. They were willing to experiment, to improvise, to try new things. And in the end, that was their greatest strength. It's a lesson that is as applicable to the boardroom as it is to the battlefield. In any competitive environment, the ability to adapt is crucial. The world is constantly changing. The challenges we face are constantly evolving. And if we are to succeed, we must be willing to change with them. We must be willing to question the old rules, to challenge the established way of doing things, and to find new solutions to new problems. We must be willing to be like Thomas Bennett. His story is not just a story about war. It is a story about the human condition. It is a story about our ability to overcome adversity, to find hope in the darkest of times, and to achieve the impossible. It is a story that should inspire us all. It is a story that should never be forgotten. Let's consider the camaraderie of the gun crew, the bond that is forged in the crucible of combat. These were men who lived together, fought together, and, if necessary, would have died together. They were a team, a well-oiled machine. Each man had his job, and he did it without question. The loader, the gunner, the assistant gunner, they all depended on each other, and they all depended on their corporal, on Bennett, to lead them. When Bennett made the decision to break the rules, he was not just risking his own life. He was risking the lives of his men. He was taking a gamble with their future, and they followed him. They trusted his judgment. They believed in him. That is a bond that is stronger than steel. It is a bond that is forged in the shared experience of fear and courage and survival. It is the bond of brothers. And when the first Panther exploded, the cheer that went up was not just a cheer of victory. It was a cheer of affirmation. A cheer that said, "We were right to trust you. We were right to follow you." It was a moment of pure, unadulterated triumph. A moment that they would carry with them for the rest of their lives. A moment that would define them, not just as soldiers, but as men. This is the human element of war that is so often overlooked. The relationships, the emotions, the bonds that are formed between the men who fight it. It is these things, as much as any weapon or any strategy, that determine the outcome of a battle. A soldier who is fighting for his buddies, for the man next to him, is a soldier who will fight with a ferocity that no amount of training or discipline can instill. He is a soldier who will do the impossible. And that is what Bennett's crew did that day. They did the impossible. They took on the best that the German army had to offer, and they won. They won because they had a leader who was willing to think differently, and they won because they were a team of brothers, united in their determination to survive, a team that, for one brief, glorious moment, held the fate of a battle in their hands. It's a story that has been repeated countless times throughout history, the story of a small group of determined individuals who, against all odds, achieve a great victory. It is the story of the 300 Spartans at Thermopylae. It is the story of the outnumbered British pilots in the Battle of Britain. It is the story of the American GIs at Bastogne. It is a story that reminds us that the human spirit is an indomitable force, a force that can overcome any obstacle, any enemy, any odds. And it is a story that is particularly American, the story of the underdog, the little guy who takes on the giant and wins. It is a story that is woven into the fabric of our national identity. It is a story that speaks to our belief in the power of the individual, in the importance of self-reliance, and in the idea that anyone, no matter how humble their origins, can rise to the occasion and do great things. Thomas Bennett was the embodiment of that American spirit. He was a quiet, unassuming hero, a man who did not seek glory or recognition, a man who was simply doing his job, protecting his men and serving his country. But in doing so, he became a legend that is a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit and to the extraordinary courage of the ordinary soldier. If these memories of sacrifice resonate with you, please consider liking this video, leaving a comment with your thoughts, and subscribing to ensure these stories are never forgotten. The aftermath of the battle was a scene of surreal carnage. The two destroyed Panthers were burning fiercely, their blackened hulls a stark monument to the destructive power of modern warfare. The third, the one that had been disabled, had been abandoned by its crew, a silent steel ghost on the edge of the battlefield. The other two had vanished, swallowed up by the morning mist from which they had emerged. The men in Bennett's gun pit were in a state of shock. They were giddy with relief, with the adrenaline of combat still coursing through their veins. They clapped each other on the back. They laughed. They cried. They had stared into the abyss, and they had survived. They had done the impossible, and now, in the quiet aftermath, the enormity of what they had accomplished was beginning to sink in. Bennett himself was quiet. He was looking at the destruction he had wrought, at the burning hulks of the tanks that had been, only moments before, the most feared weapons on the battlefield. He felt a sense of pride, of accomplishment, but he also felt a sense of awe at the destructive power of the weapon he commanded, awe at the fragility of life, and the thin line that separates it from death. He was a farm boy. He was used to creating life, to nurturing it. He was not a destroyer, but war had made him one. It had forced him to become something he was not, and in that moment, looking at the fruits of his labor, he felt the full weight of that transformation. He had saved his men. He had done his duty, but he had also taken life, and that was a burden that he would carry with him for the rest of his days. This is the hidden cost of war, the cost that is not measured in dollars or in lives lost, the cost that is paid by the soldiers who fight it in the currency of their souls. They are the ones who have to live with the memories, with the things they have seen and done. They are the ones who have to find a way to reconcile the man they were with the man that war has made them. It is a battle that is fought not on the fields of France, but in the quiet chambers of the human heart. And It is a battle that for many is never truly won. But in that moment, there was also a sense of profound gratitude. Gratitude for being alive. Gratitude for the men who stood beside him. Gratitude for the strange, improbable turn of events that had led to their survival. It was a feeling that was so intense, so overwhelming, that it was almost painful. It was the feeling of having been given a second chance, a chance to live, to love, to go home, a chance that so many others would not get. And so they packed up their gun, they policed their brass, and they moved on. There were other battles to be fought, other hedgerows to be cleared, other towns to be liberated. The war was far from over, but something had changed. They were no longer the same men who had woken up that morning. They had been tested, and they had not been found wanting. They had faced the beast, and they had won. They had a story to tell, a story that would become a legend, a story of how one man, with one forbidden trick, had turned the tide of a battle, and in doing so, had become a hero. It is a story that reminds us that heroes are not born. They are made. They are made in the crucible of crisis, in the moments when all hope seems lost. They are made by the choices they make, the risks they take, the sacrifices they endure. They are ordinary people who, when called upon, do extraordinary things. And in a world that is often cynical and jaded, it is a story that we need to hear, a story that reminds us of the best that we can be. Let's think about the ripple effect of this single engagement. The two surviving Panther crews would have returned to their base, their faces pale with shock. They would have reported what had happened. An American anti-tank gun, firing from an impossible range, with an impossible trajectory. Their report would have been met with disbelief, with skepticism. But the evidence was there, in the burning wrecks of their comrades' tanks. Something new was happening on the battlefield. The rules had changed. The German command would have been forced to react. They would have had to change their tactics. They could no longer assume that their Panthers were invincible. They would have to be more cautious, more wary. They would have to treat every American anti-tank gun as a potential threat, a potential killer. The psychological advantage that they had enjoyed for so long was gone. And in a war that was becoming increasingly a war of attrition, that was a significant blow. On the American side, the effect was the opposite. The story of Bennett's victory, as it spread through the ranks, was a powerful morale booster. It was a David and Goliath story. A story of the underdog triumphing against the odds. It was a story that gave the GIs a sense of pride, of confidence. It was a story that made them believe that they could win. And that belief, that confidence, is a weapon in itself. A soldier who believes he can win is a soldier who will fight harder, who will take more risks, who will endure more hardship. He is a soldier who is more likely to achieve the impossible. And in the brutal, grinding warfare of the Normandy campaign, the impossible was what was required. So, the actions of one man, in one small corner of the battlefield, had an impact that was far greater than he could ever have imagined. It was an impact that was felt not just by the men in his crew or the men in his company, but by the entire army. It was an impact that helped to shape the course of the war. It is a powerful testament to the idea that one person can make a difference, an idea that is at the heart of the American experience. It is also a testament to the importance of bottom-up innovation, the kind of innovation that comes not from the top down, from the generals and the planners, but from the bottom up, from the soldiers on the front lines, the ones who are facing the problems, who are living the reality of the war. They are the ones who are best placed to find the solutions. They are the ones who have the practical knowledge, the hands-on experience, to see what will work and what will not. Bennett was not a military strategist. He was not an engineer. He was a gunner. He knew his weapon. He knew its strengths and its weaknesses, and he knew the enemy he was facing. And with that knowledge, he was able to come up with a solution that had eluded all the experts. A solution that was simple, elegant, and devastatingly effective. It is a lesson that is as relevant today as it was in 1944. The people on the front lines, the ones who are doing the work, are often the ones who have the best ideas, and we should listen to them. If these memories of sacrifice resonate with you, please consider liking this video, leaving a comment with your thoughts, and subscribing to ensure these stories are never forgotten. The story of Thomas Bennett and his forbidden trick is more than just a war story. It is a story about the human spirit. It is a story about the power of ingenuity, the importance of courage, and the will to survive. It is a story that reminds us that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope. And it is a story that is a testament to the extraordinary character of the ordinary American soldier. Let's delve deeper into the mind of the soldier. The constant state of heightened awareness, the senses working overtime, the smell of the damp earth, the taste of fear in the back of your throat, the sound of a twig snapping in the distance. The world is a dangerous place, and you are constantly on the lookout for the thing that is going to kill you. It is a state of being that is impossible to understand unless you have experienced it. It is a state of being that changes you forever. And in the midst of this, you have to function. You have to do your job. You have to follow orders. You have to be a part of a team. You have to suppress your own fear, your own desire to run and hide, and you have to do what is expected of you. It is a monumental act of will, an act of courage that is performed every day by millions of soldiers in wars all over the world. But sometimes following orders is not enough. Sometimes the orders are wrong. Sometimes the situation has changed and the old rules no longer apply. And in those moments, a different kind of courage is required. The courage to think for yourself, the courage to challenge authority, the courage to take a risk, the courage to do what you believe is right, even if it means breaking the rules. This is the courage that Thomas Bennett displayed on that day in September 1944. It is a courage that is born of desperation, but it is also a courage that is born of intelligence, of creativity, of a deep understanding of the situation. It is the courage of a leader, a man who is willing to take responsibility, not just for himself, but for the men who are under his command. His story is a powerful counter-narrative to the idea that soldiers are just unthinking cogs in a machine, that they are just automatons who follow orders without question. The reality is far more complex. Soldiers are thinking, feeling human beings. They are constantly making decisions, constantly assessing risks, constantly trying to find a better way to do their job. They are innovators. They are problem solvers. And sometimes they are heroes. And the innovation doesn't stop with the high-angle fire. The story of the American GI in World War II is filled with examples of battlefield ingenuity. The use of Culin hedgerow cutters, makeshift steel teeth welded to the front of Sherman tanks to bust through the dense Normandy hedgerows. The development of doodlebugs, remote-controlled bomb-laden tanks used to clear bunkers. The creation of GI coffee, made by heating water in a helmet over a fire of scavenged wood. These were all examples of the same spirit of improvisation, of making do with what you have, of finding a way to get the job done. It is a spirit that is deeply ingrained in the American character. A spirit of self-reliance, of pragmatism, of a can-do attitude, a spirit that says, if it's broken, fix it. If you don't have the right tool, invent one. It is a spirit that has served us well, not just in war, but in peace. It is the spirit of the pioneer, the entrepreneur, the inventor. It is the spirit of a nation that was built on the idea that anything is possible. And so, the story of Thomas Bennett is not just a story about a single soldier, it is a story about all of us. It is a story about who we are as a people who, when faced with a challenge, do not shrink from it, but rise to meet it. A people who are not afraid to break the rules, to think differently, to find a new way. A people who, in the words of the old saying, can make a way out of no way. It is a legacy that we should be proud of, a legacy that we should strive to live up to, a legacy that is embodied in the story of a young corporal from the heartland, who, with one forbidden trick, became a giant killer and a hero for the ages. Let's consider the weapon itself, the M5 3-inch gun. It was a hybrid, a marriage of the barrel of an anti-aircraft gun and the carriage of a howitzer. It was a compromise, a weapon that was designed to be good at two things, and as a result was not great at either. It was too heavy to be easily maneuvered by its crew, and its profile was too high, making it a difficult weapon to conceal. And as we have seen, its anti-tank performance was, by 1944, woefully inadequate against the new generation of German armor. But in the hands of a man like Thomas Bennett, it became something more. It became a surgical instrument of destruction. It became a weapon that could reach out and touch the enemy in a way that its designers had never imagined. It is a powerful reminder that a weapon is only as good as the man who wields it. A mediocre weapon in the hands of a brilliant soldier is far more effective than a brilliant weapon in the hands of a mediocre one. This is a truth that has been demonstrated time and time again throughout military history. The English longbowmen at Agincourt, who, with their superior skill and training, decimated a much larger and better equipped French army. The Finnish ski troops in the Winter War, who, with their knowledge of the terrain and their innovative tactics, held off the might of the Soviet Red Army for 3 months. The Israeli pilots in the Six-Day War, who, with their superior training and audacity, destroyed the air forces of 3 Arab nations in a matter of hours. In all of these cases, it was the human element, the skill, and the courage and the ingenuity of the soldier that made the difference. And so it was with Thomas Bennett and his crew. They were the X factor, the variable that the Germans had not accounted for. They were the ones who turned a flawed weapon into a war winner. They were the ones who proved that the will to win is more important than the tools of war. It is a lesson that is often forgotten in our modern, technology-obsessed world. We are constantly searching for the next wonder weapon, the next technological fix that will give us an edge over our adversaries, but we would do well to remember that the most powerful weapon of all is the one that resides within the human heart, the courage to face our fears, the ingenuity to solve our problems, and the will to persevere, no matter what the odds. This is the legacy of Thomas Bennett, a legacy that is not written in stone or cast in bronze, but is etched in the memory of a nation, a legacy that reminds us of the extraordinary things that ordinary people are capable of when they are called upon to do so, a legacy that should inspire us to be better, to be braver, to be more ingenious, a legacy that should never be forgotten. If these memories of sacrifice resonate with you, please consider liking this video, leaving a comment with your thoughts, and subscribing to ensure these stories are never forgotten. The story of Thomas Bennett is a microcosm of the larger story of the American experience in World War II. A story of a nation that was unprepared for war, a nation that had to learn on the job, a nation that made mistakes, but a nation that ultimately, through its industrial might, its democratic ideals, and the courage and ingenuity of its people, prevailed. When the United States entered the war in 1941, its army was a shadow of what it would become. It was small, it was poorly equipped, and it was trained in the outdated doctrines of World War I. It was an army that was not ready for the Blitzkrieg, the lightning war, that the Germans had perfected. The early battles in North Africa were a brutal wake-up call. The American GIs were outthought, outfought, and outgunned by the veteran troops of the Afrika Korps. The M3 Garand tank, with its sponson-mounted main gun, was a death trap. The M3 Stuart light tank was a Purple Heart box. The tactics were rigid and unimaginative. It was a disaster. But the American Army learned. It adapted. It evolved. It developed new weapons, like the M4 Sherman, which, while still outclassed by the Panther and the Tiger, was a reliable and versatile tank that could be produced in vast numbers. It developed new tactics, like the combined arms doctrine that integrated infantry, armor, and artillery into a cohesive fighting force. And it developed new leaders, men like Patton and Bradley and Eisenhower, who understood the nature of modern mechanized warfare. And most importantly, it had the American GI, the citizen soldier who, despite his lack of experience, had a spirit of initiative, of resourcefulness, of a refusal to be beaten. That was the Army's greatest asset. He was the man who, when his tank was knocked out, would grab a bazooka and go after the enemy on foot. He was the man who, when his machine gun jammed, would fix it under fire. He was the man who, when his anti-tank gun couldn't penetrate the enemy's armor, would find a new way to make it do so. This was the secret weapon of the American Army. Not a piece of technology, but a state of mind. A state of mind that was forged in the crucible of a democracy. A society that values individual freedom, that encourages critical thinking, that celebrates the underdog. It was a state of mind that the Germans, with their rigid, hierarchical, top-down culture, could not understand and could not defeat. And so, the story of Thomas Bennett is not just the story of one man. It is the story of a generation. The greatest generation, as they have been called. A generation of men and women who, when faced with the greatest threat to freedom that the world has ever known, rose to the occasion. A generation that sacrificed, that endured, that fought, and that won. A generation that saved the world. It is a legacy that is almost too vast to comprehend. A legacy that we are all, in some way, the beneficiaries of. We live in a world that was shaped by their sacrifice. We enjoy freedoms that were bought with their blood. We are the heirs to the peace that they won. And it is a legacy that we have a sacred duty to remember the stories, to honor the memories, to learn the lessons, to ensure that their sacrifice was not in vain, to ensure that the world that they fought for, a world of freedom, of democracy, of human dignity, is a world that we continue to build, to defend, and to cherish. So let us not forget the story of Thomas Bennett. Let us not forget the story of the greatest generation. Let us not forget the price of freedom. And let us not forget our duty to be worthy of that price. It is the least we can do. It is the most we can do. Let's close with a final thought. A thought about the nature of heroism. We often think of heroes as being larger than life, as being different from us, as being somehow special. But the story of Thomas Bennett teaches us a different lesson. It teaches us that heroes are not special. They are ordinary people who, in a moment of crisis, find something extraordinary within themselves. They are us. We are them. We all have within us the capacity for courage, for ingenuity, for sacrifice. We all have within us the capacity to be a hero. It is a choice that we make, a choice to stand up for what we believe in, a choice to help others, a choice to make a difference. It is a choice that is presented to us, not on the battlefields of a foreign land, but in the everyday moments of our lives. And so, the story of Thomas Bennett is not just a story about the past, it is a story about the present. It is a story about the future. It is a story that challenges us to be better, to be braver, to be more like him. It is a story that reminds us that the hero is not someone else. The hero is you. If these memories of sacrifice resonate with you, please consider liking this video, leaving a comment with your thoughts, and subscribing to ensure these stories are never forgotten. Let's explore the German perspective in more detail. Imagine a young lieutenant, perhaps on his first command, leading that column of Panthers. He has been trained in the finest Panzer academies, steeped in the doctrine of Guderian and Rommel. He believes in the superiority of his machine, in the invincibility of German steel. His mission is simple: to punch through the American lines, to sow chaos and destruction, to restore the momentum of the German war machine. He sees the American anti-tank gun position on the ridge. He is not worried. He has seen it 100 times before. A puny 3-inch gun, no match for his Panther. He orders his driver to advance, confident in the knowledge that his frontal armor will deflect anything the Americans can throw at him. He is the hunter, and they are the prey. It is the natural order of things. And then, the impossible happens. A shell falls from the sky, a bolt from the blue. His lead tank, the pride of his platoon, is transformed into a funeral pyre. He is stunned, confused. It must be a fluke, a lucky shot. He orders his remaining tanks to press forward, to avenge their fallen comrades. And then it happens again. Another shell, another explosion, another tank destroyed. The world has turned upside down. The hunter has become the hunted. Panic sets in. He orders his tanks to retreat, to get out of the kill zone. He has no idea what is happening, what kind of weapon he is facing. He has been trained to fight a war of maneuver, of direct fire, of clear lines of sight. He has not been trained to fight a war of shadows, of unseen enemies, of shells that fall from the heavens. He is a product of a system that values order, precision, and predictability. And he has just encountered something that is none of those things. He has encountered the chaos of human ingenuity. He returns to his base, a defeated man. He has lost 2 tanks, 2 crews, and his own sense of invincibility. He has to write a report to explain what happened. But how can he explain the inexplicable? How can he describe a weapon that does not exist? His report will be met with disbelief, with ridicule. He will be accused of cowardice, of incompetence. His career will be ruined, and all because of a young American corporal who refused to follow the rules. This is the other side of the story of the men who were on the receiving end of Bennett's forbidden trick, the story of the men whose world was turned upside down, whose confidence was shattered, whose lives were changed forever. It is a story that reminds us that in war, there are no winners, there are only survivors, and even they are scarred in ways that are not always visible to the naked eye. Let's also consider the broader context of the war. In September 1944, the Allies had broken out of the Normandy beachhead. Paris had been liberated. The German army was in full retreat across France. The end of the war seemed to be in sight. There was a sense of optimism, of euphoria among the Allied troops. They were on the winning side. They were going home. But the war was far from over. The German army, though battered and bruised, was not broken. It was a wounded animal, and a wounded animal is at its most dangerous. It was retreating to the borders of its own country, to the Siegfried Line, a formidable network of fortifications that was designed to be impregnable. It was preparing to make a last stand, a stand that would be fought with the ferocity of a cornered beast. And the German army still had some formidable weapons in its arsenal. The Panther and the Tiger tanks, the Me-262 jet fighter, the V-2 rocket. These were weapons that were technologically superior to anything the Allies had. They were weapons that, in the hands of a determined and fanatical enemy, could still inflict terrible casualties. The war was not over. The hardest fighting, the bloodiest battles were still to come. This is the context in which the story of Thomas Bennett takes place. A context of hope, but also of danger. A context of victory, but also of uncertainty. A context in which the ingenuity and the courage of a single soldier could still make a difference. A context in which the will to win was still the most important weapon of all. His story is a reminder that the path to victory is never a straight line. It is a winding, twisting road, filled with unexpected obstacles and unforeseen challenges. It is a road that requires constant adaptation, constant innovation, constant perseverance. It is a road that is paved with the courage and the sacrifice of countless ordinary men and women who, when faced with the darkness, find a way to be a light. Let's think about the legacy of this event. The immediate legacy was the survival of Bennett's crew and the destruction of 3 enemy tanks. The short-term legacy was the spread of the high-angle fire tactic among other American anti-tank units and the subsequent increase in the kill ratio against German armor. The long-term legacy was the influence on the design of modern top-attack anti-tank weapons. But there is another legacy, a more intangible one, a legacy that is not about weapons or tactics, but about the human spirit. It is the legacy of a story that has been passed down from one generation to the next, a story that has become a part of the folklore of the American Army, a story that continues to inspire, to instruct, and to remind us of the extraordinary things that ordinary people are capable of. It is a story that is particularly important today in a world that is so often defined by cynicism and despair, a world in which it is easy to feel powerless, to feel that the challenges we face are too great, that the forces we are up against are too strong. The story of Thomas Bennett is an antidote to that despair. It is a story that reminds us that one person can make a difference, that courage and ingenuity can overcome even the most formidable of obstacles. That hope is never lost. So let us tell this story. Let us share it with our children and our grandchildren. Let us ensure that it is never forgotten, because it is more than just a war story. It is a story about the best of who we are, a story about the enduring power of the human spirit, a story that is, in the end, a story of hope. Let's consider the physical and mental toll on the soldiers, the constant fatigue, the lack of sleep, the poor food, the exposure to the elements, the mud, the rain, the cold, the constant threat of death from a shell, a bullet, a mine, the psychological stress of being in a constant state of high alert, of seeing your friends killed and wounded, of having to kill other human beings. It is a level of stress that is almost unimaginable to those of us who have never experienced it. And yet, they endured. They found ways to cope. They found solace in the camaraderie of their fellow soldiers, in the dark humor that is the soldier's constant companion, in the small comforts of a cigarette, a letter from home, a hot meal. They found a way to keep going, to put one foot in front of the other to do their job. It is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a testament to our ability to endure, to adapt, and to survive, even in the most hellish of circumstances. And in the midst of this, there were moments of grace, moments of beauty, a sunrise over a misty field, the laughter of a French child, the kindness of a stranger, moments that reminded them that there was still good in the world, that there was something worth fighting for, that there was a life to be lived beyond the war. These are the moments that kept them sane, the moments that gave them hope, the moments that allowed them to hold on to their humanity in a world that was doing its best to strip it away from them. These are the moments that are so often missing from the history books, but that are at the heart of the soldier's experience. And so when we think of Thomas Bennett, let us not just think of him as a hero, as a giant killer. Let us also think of him as a man who was cold and tired and scared, a man who missed his home, his family, his life, a man who, in the midst of the horror of war, found a way to do something extraordinary, a man who, in doing so, became a symbol of the enduring power of the human spirit, a symbol of hope, a symbol of the best of who we are. If these memories of sacrifice resonate with you, please consider liking this video, leaving a comment with your thoughts, and subscribing to ensure these stories are never forgotten. Let's bring the story to a close. The war in Europe ended in May 1945. The guns fell silent. The killing stopped. The soldiers went home. They took off their uniforms, and they put on civilian clothes. They went back to their farms, their factories, their colleges. They tried to pick up the pieces of their lives. They tried to forget, but they could not forget. The memories were too strong. The scars were too deep. They were a generation that had been marked by war, a generation that had seen too much, that had lost too much, a generation that would forever be defined by their shared experience of the greatest conflict in human history. And yet they did not despair. They did not give up. They took the same courage, the same ingenuity, the same determination that they had shown on the battlefield, and they applied it to the task of building a new world, a world of peace, of prosperity, of freedom, a world that was worthy of the sacrifices that had been made. They were the generation that built the post-war world, the generation that created the United Nations, the Marshall Plan, the NATO alliance, the generation that fueled the economic boom of the 1950s and 60s, the generation that put a man on the moon. They were the greatest generation, and their legacy is all around us. So when we look at the world we live in today, with all of its problems, with all of its challenges, let us not forget the debt that we owe to them. Let us not forget the sacrifices that they made, and let us not forget the lessons that they taught us. The lessons about courage, about sacrifice, about the importance of freedom, and about the enduring power of the human spirit. And let us, in our own lives, strive to be worthy of that legacy. Let us strive to be the kind of people that they would be proud of, the kind of people who, when faced with a challenge, do not shrink from it, but rise to meet it, the kind of people who, in our own small way, can make a difference, the kind of people who can, like Thomas Bennett, find a way to be a hero. His story is a timeless one. It is a story that will be told as long as there are wars to be fought, as long as there are challenges to be overcome, as long as there are human beings who dare to dream of a better world. It is a story that is a testament to the best of who we are and the best of what we can be. It is a story that should never be forgotten, and thanks to you, it won't be. Final CTA. If these memories of sacrifice resonate with you, and you believe that the stories of these heroes should be preserved for future generations, please consider liking this video, leaving a comment with your thoughts, and subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us to ensure that these stories are never forgotten. Thank you for listening, and may we never forget the price of our freedom. Let's rewind the tape and zoom in, not on the action, but on the silence before it. The silence of a Normandy dawn, which is never truly silent. It's a symphony of tension, the drip of dew from a leaf sounding as loud as a footstep, the nervous cough of a comrade quickly stifled, the distant, almost imperceptible drone of an aircraft. Friend or foe, impossible to tell. This is the world of the combat soldier, a world where every sense is stretched to its breaking point, where the boundary between the mundane and the lethal is razor thin. For Corporal Thomas Bennett and his men, this was their reality. They were not seasoned veterans, not yet. They were boys, barely men, plucked from the farms of the Midwest and the streets of the East Coast, and thrust into the crucible of the world's most savage war. They had learned to live with fear, to make it a companion. But the fear of the Panther was different. It was a primal fear, a fear of a monster that could not be slain. It was the fear of being rendered utterly, hopelessly obsolete. Their M5 gun, which had seemed so formidable in training back in the States, now felt like a child's toy. They had polished its brass casing until it shone, memorized its every part, learned its every quirk. They had given it a name, Betty, after a girl back home. It was their talisman, their protector. But against the Panther, Betty was powerless. The realization was a slow, creeping poison, sapping their morale, their confidence, their will to fight. They had heard the stories of entire platoons of Shermans wiped out by a single Tiger, stories of anti-tank guns crushed under the treads of an advancing Panzer. These stories were the currency of the front lines, traded in hushed whispers, each one a nail in the coffin of their hope. They were facing an enemy that was not just better equipped, but seemed to belong to a different, more brutal species of warfare. And so, on that fateful morning, as the 5 Panthers emerged from the mist, it was not just a tactical problem that Bennett faced. It was an existential one. It was a test of his very reason for being there. Was he to be a passive victim, a statistic in a long and bloody war? Or was he to be an agent of his own destiny? A man who, when faced with the abyss, refused to blink. His decision to break the rules was not a moment of sudden divine inspiration. It was the culmination of weeks of frustration, of fear, of a growing sense of desperation. It was the act of a man who had been pushed to the very edge, and who, in that moment, found a strength he did not know he possessed. It was the strength to think, to reason, to see beyond the confines of his training, and to find a new way. And in that moment, he was not just a corporal, he was a leader. He was a beacon of hope for the men who looked to him for answers. He was the embodiment of the American spirit, the spirit of a nation that has always believed that no problem is too big, no challenge too great, to be overcome by the power of human ingenuity. Let's consider the sheer audacity of the act. To fire a direct-fire weapon as a piece of artillery, it was not just against the rules, it was against the very nature of the weapon. It was like using a scalpel as a sledgehammer. It was an act of profound, almost beautiful defiance. A defiance of the enemy, of the rule book, of the very laws of probability. And it worked, not just once, but 3 times. 3 perfect shots, 3 steel behemoths reduced to burning scrap. It was a feat of gunnery that was almost beyond belief. A feat that was made possible by a combination of desperation, intelligence, and a healthy dose of dumb luck. But as the old saying goes, fortune favors the bold. And on that day, there was no one bolder, than Thomas Bennett. His story is a powerful reminder that the human element is, and always will be, the decisive factor in warfare. You can have the best technology, the most advanced weapons, the most brilliant strategies, but in the end, it is the soldier on the ground, the man in the foxhole, who wins or loses the battle. It is his courage, his ingenuity, his will to fight that makes the difference. And the American GI of World War II had those qualities in abundance. He was not a professional soldier. He was a citizen soldier, fighting not for conquest or for glory, but for the defense of his home, his family, and his way of life. He was fighting for an idea, the idea of freedom. And that is the most powerful motivation of all. So let us not forget the story of Thomas Bennett. Let us not forget the story of the millions of other ordinary men and women who, in a time of great crisis, did extraordinary things. Let us not forget the price that they paid, and let us not forget the debt that we owe them, a debt that can never be repaid, but that can and must be honored. By remembering their stories, by living up to their example, and by ensuring that the world that they fought for, a world of freedom and of peace, is a world that we continue to build, to defend, and to cherish for all the generations to come. Let's add another layer to this narrative, the landscape itself, the Normandy bocage. It was a landscape that was both beautiful and deadly, a patchwork of small fields separated by ancient earthen walls, topped with thick, tangled hedgerows. It was a landscape that had been shaped by centuries of agriculture, of a slow, patient human interaction with the land, and in the summer and fall of 1944, it became a killing field. The hedgerows were a defender's dream and an attacker's nightmare. They were natural fortifications, providing perfect cover and concealment. A machine gun nest hidden in a hedgerow could hold up an entire company. A tank lurking behind a hedgerow was all but invisible. The fighting was close, brutal, and personal. It was a war of inches, of yards, of one bloody field at a time. This was the world that Bennett and his men inhabited, a world of green fields and blue skies punctuated by the sudden violent eruption of death, a world where the beauty of the landscape was a cruel mockery of the ugliness of the war, a world where every hedgerow could be a trap, every field a kill zone. And it was this landscape that, in a strange way, made Bennett's innovation possible. The sunken lane in which the Panthers were advancing provided the depression that made the high-angle shot necessary. The hedgerow on the ridge provided the cover that allowed Bennett's crew to set up their gun, to take their time, to make their calculations without being seen. The landscape was both the problem and the solution. It was the cage, and it was the key. It is a powerful metaphor for the nature of war itself, a thing of contradictions, of ironies, of unexpected twists and turns, a thing that can bring out the worst in human beings, but also the best, a thing that can destroy, but also create, a thing that can take everything from you, but also give you a sense of purpose, of camaraderie, of a life lived at its most intense. And so, the story of Thomas Bennett is not just a story about a soldier or a weapon or a battle. It is a story about the human experience in all of its complexity, in all of its terror, and in all of its glory. It is a story that is as old as humanity itself, and it is a story that will continue to be told as long as we have the courage to remember. Let's consider the aftermath for the German side in more detail. The report from the surviving lieutenant would have worked its way up the chain of command, a piece of battlefield anomaly that defied easy explanation. In the rigid, hierarchical structure of the Wehrmacht, such a report would have been met with skepticism. The initial reaction would have been to blame the crew, cowardice, incompetence, battle fatigue. These were the easy answers. The answers that did not challenge the established doctrine. The answers that did not question the superiority of German engineering. But the reports would have kept coming. From other sectors, from other units, Panthers and Tigers, the apex predators of the battlefield, being knocked out by what seemed to be artillery fire, but with a precision that was unheard of. The physical evidence was undeniable. The entry holes were on the top of the turrets, on the engine decks. The angle of penetration was almost vertical. This was not a fluke. This was a new tactic. German intelligence would have been tasked with solving the mystery. They would have analyzed the shell fragments, the crater patterns, the after-action reports. They would have interrogated captured American prisoners, but they would have found nothing. There was no new weapon. There was no new doctrine. The answer was not in any manual, not in any intelligence briefing. The answer was in the minds of the American GIs, in the informal, word-of-mouth network that spread the knowledge of Bennett's trick from one gun crew to another. This was a new kind of warfare, a decentralized, bottom-up, open-source kind of warfare, a kind of warfare that the Germans, with their top-down command and control mentality, were ill-equipped to understand, let alone to counter. They were fighting an army that was learning adapting, and innovating, not at the speed of a bureaucracy, but at the speed of a conversation. It was a profound and ultimately decisive asymmetry. And so, the legend of the miracle shells would have grown, not just on the American side, but on the German side as well. It would have become a ghost story, a piece of battlefield folklore that would have haunted the dreams of every Panzer crewman, a story of a phantom weapon that could strike from anywhere, at any time, a story that would have added a new layer of psychological stress to the already immense pressures of combat, a story that would have made them question their own invincibility. And in a war that was increasingly a war of morale, that was a weapon of immense power, it is a fascinating example of how information, or misinformation, can be as powerful a weapon as any piece of steel. The story of Bennett's trick was a virus, a meme, that spread through the collective consciousness of the battlefield, changing perceptions, altering behaviors, and ultimately shaping the outcome of the war. It is a testament to the power of a good story, and a reminder that the pen, or in this case the whispered word, can indeed be mightier than the sword. If these memories of sacrifice resonate with you, please consider liking this video, leaving a comment with your thoughts, and subscribing to ensure these stories are never forgotten. Let's take a moment to appreciate the sheer, unadulterated courage required for that first shot. It's one thing to have a desperate idea. It's another thing entirely to act on it, especially when the stakes are so high. Bennett wasn't just risking a court-martial, he was risking the immediate and violent annihilation of himself and his men. If he missed, the muzzle flash would have been a dinner bell for the Panthers. They would have pinpointed his position in seconds, and the return fire would have been swift and final. He had one shot, one chance to turn a wild theory into a life-saving reality. The pressure of that moment is almost impossible to comprehend. The fate of his crew, the outcome of the engagement, his own survival, it all rested on a single, untested, and frankly insane calculation. He had to trust his gut, his instincts, his farm boy understanding of physics. He had to have faith in himself even when the entire military establishment was telling him he was wrong. That is a level of courage that goes beyond the physical. It is a moral courage, an intellectual courage. It is the courage to be an individual, to think for yourself, to take responsibility for your own destiny. It is the kind of courage that defines a hero, not a hero in the comic book sense, but a hero in the truest sense of the word. A man who, when faced with a choice between the easy path and the right path, chooses the right path, no matter how difficult, no matter how dangerous. And his crew, let's not forget them, they didn't have to follow him. They could have refused. They could have pointed to the manual, to the regulations. They would have been within their rights to do so, but they didn't. They trusted their corporal. They had faith in his leadership. They were a team, and in that moment of crisis, they acted as one. Their courage was a reflection of his. Their trust was a testament to his leadership. They were all heroes that day. This is the untold story of warfare, the story of the small units, the squads, the gun crews, the tank crews, the story of the bonds that are forged in the heat of battle, the trust that is built in the face of death. It is a story that is often lost in the grand narratives of strategy and politics, but it is the most important story of all, because it is the story of the human heart, and the human heart is the ultimate battlefield. Let's consider the broader implications of this kind of bottom-up innovation. It is a profoundly democratic idea. It is the idea that the best solutions can come from anywhere, from anyone, regardless of rank or position. It is the idea that the collective intelligence of a group is far greater than the intelligence of any single individual. It is an idea that is at the very core of the American experiment. And it is an idea that has been proven time and time again, not just in war, but in business, in science, in the arts. The greatest breakthroughs, the most transformative innovations, have often come from the fringes, from the outsiders, from the people who were not afraid to challenge the conventional wisdom, the people who were not afraid to be like Thomas Bennett. His story is a powerful lesson for all of us, a lesson about the importance of empowering individuals, of fostering a culture of innovation, of creating an environment where people are not afraid to take risks, to make mistakes, to try new things. It is a lesson that is more important today than ever before, in a world that is facing challenges of unprecedented complexity. So let us celebrate the story of Thomas Bennett. Let us celebrate his courage, his ingenuity, his leadership, and let us celebrate the system that produced him. A system that, for all of its flaws, has at its heart a deep and abiding faith in the power of the individual, a faith that has been and will continue to be the source of our greatest strength. As the sun set on that September day, the men of Bennett's crew would have gathered around their gun, their faces illuminated by the flickering light of the burning Panthers. They would have been exhausted, emotionally and physically drained, but they would have also been filled with a sense of pride, of accomplishment, of a job well done. They had faced the beast, and they had won. They had survived, And in the quiet moments of that evening, as they cleaned their weapon and prepared for the next day's fight, they would have talked. They would have replayed the events of the day, over and over again. They would have marveled at their own audacity, at their own luck. They would have laughed at the absurdity of it all. And in doing so, they would have begun the process of turning a traumatic experience into a story that they would carry with them for the rest of their lives, a story that would become a part of who they were. This is how we make sense of the senseless. This is how we find meaning in the madness. We tell stories, we create narratives, we transform the raw, chaotic data of experience into something that has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Something that has a purpose, a lesson, a moral. It is a fundamental human need, and it is a need that is never more acute than in the aftermath of war. The story of Thomas Bennett and his forbidden trick is one of those stories, a story that has been polished and refined over the years, passed down from one soldier to another until it has achieved the status of a legend. But at its heart, it is a true story, a story of ordinary men who, in an extraordinary moment, found it within themselves to do something truly great. A story that reminds us of the enduring power of the human spirit and of the unquenchable thirst for freedom that resides in all of our hearts. Final CTA. If these memories of sacrifice resonate with you, and you believe that the stories of these heroes should be preserved for future generations, please consider liking this video, leaving a comment with your thoughts, and subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us to ensure that these stories are never forgotten. Thank you for listening. And may we never forget the price of our freedom. Let us reflect, finally, on the nature of these stories themselves. They are more than just historical accounts. They are artifacts of memory, passed down through time, each telling shaped by the teller, each listening colored by the listener. They are the threads that connect us to the past, that allow us to touch for a moment the reality of a world that is rapidly fading from living memory. The generation that fought this war is almost gone. Their voices are growing faint, and with them, we risk losing the stories, the lessons, the warnings. This is why this work is so important, why the act of listening, of remembering, of retelling is a sacred duty. It is an act of defiance against the silence, against the forgetting. It is an act of honoring the dead and of educating the living. It is an act of ensuring that the sacrifices of the past were not made in vain, because a story that is not told is a story that is lost. A lesson that is not learned is a lesson that will have to be taught again in the brutal language of war. So as we listen to this story, let us not just hear the tale of a clever trick with an anti-tank gun. Let us hear the echo of a generation's courage. Let us feel the weight of their sacrifice. And let us accept the responsibility that comes with that knowledge. The responsibility to remember, the responsibility to learn, and the responsibility to build a world that is worthy of their legacy. A world where such stories are no longer a necessity, but a choice. A world of peace, a world of freedom, a world that they, in their darkest moments, could only dream of. Their dream is now our reality, and it is our sacred duty to protect.